Hi everybody, it's Joe Cioffi, day after Christmas. I hope everybody had a Merry Christmas, and I had such an incredible white Christmas experience with the snow that fell where I was in Thomaston, Connecticut, which is north of Waterbury in Litchfield County in the northwestern part of the state. It's about maybe a little bit more, slightly more than halfway up from the coast to the northern border. It was like a storybook. I mean, it was just amazing. I did a video yesterday. If you haven't seen it yet, go in the video library and take a look. It's not very long, but I had an inkling to wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and it was amazing. It really was. It was just beautiful. The shots were right out of a postcard in a storybook. The typical New England white Christmas had a nice amount of snow, but not too much where it was problematic. Got about 3.5, 4 inches for about an hour. The last hour right before it ended, it snowed pretty steadily. Put down a quick last 1.5 inches to top off the accumulation at just under 4. And then there was that moment for about an hour or so. It was a long moment where it was just absolute quiet, not much wind. The snow was still on the trees, just made for a perfect white Christmas. I loved it. I hope, I know those of you that are up in some of the areas in the Northeast, if you were basically north of Route 287, which runs across southern Westchester and then snakes its way through Rockland County and then back down through New Jersey. If you were from that road north and west, that interstate, you got your white Christmas. If you were south and east of there, in and around the New York City area and Long Island, it didn't quite work out that way. And I hope Santa Claus brought all the nice things that you were asking for, assuming that you were all good boys and girls. Now, with that storm system gone, the thing that it did was that it brought down the first of what will be 2 shots of cold air, at least from what we can see at this point in the short and medium range. And when we look at the satellite loop tonight, even though we do see a lot of clouds over parts of the Ohio Valley and Midwest, there really isn't too much happening. We also have some cloud cover down in Texas and Louisiana, where some moisture and a cold rain has developed there. That's evident on the radar, but that is really not going to be a big player. We have so much cold air and such a strong polar jet that there really isn't much room for anything else as far as snow is concerned over the next couple of days. So the main focus of attention is going to be the temperatures, which are going to be headed down to rather low levels, and it's going to last for a while too, by the way. I mean, we went below freezing yesterday evening here in my neck of the woods. It was barely above freezing yesterday for most of the day, and we're not going to get above freezing. In fact, we may not see temperatures above 30 in most of the area for at least the next 7 or 8 days, the way it looks. And that's a fairly unusual stretch of cold, but nonetheless, that is exactly what we have. And we're going to bring up the weather models because there are a couple of forecast problems going forward with the pattern the way it is, because that dominant northern jet just is going to make it tough for any kind of precipitation to fall. Obviously, if we do get anything, it's going to be in the form of snow, but it's still going to be kind of difficult with respect to getting anything major to develop because of where the jet stream axis is going to be and just the enormity of that northern jet. It's just so overwhelming that it becomes rather problematic. So we're going to run through the models here, and here's the GFS for this evening, and you'll notice that you basically got one big sprawling high taking care of the weather everywhere east of the Rockies and not much else. And that small rain area down along the Gulf Coast. We do have some lake effect snows going on over parts of southwestern New York with the wind coming in off of Lake Erie. Some places they're getting up to 4 feet, and also some lake effect action on the east shores of Lake Ontario in north central New York and in and around the Great Lakes as well. So that system in the south is just going to go off the southeast coast overnight and not really be of consequence. And the big high builds up east of Lake Superior. It is going to be very cold here in the east. And then we start to get into the big forecast questions, because models are kind of handling things a bit differently. You can see there's a little system off the southeast coast. There's also a clipper system back over in the lakes on Friday, and that southern system goes out with no consequence. And the GFS really doesn't do much with this clipper system. It just basically overwhelms cold air, and that's at the point where models diverge, because the European and the Canadian have slightly different ideas. And then of course the GFS continues to want to try to do something else for early next week, and it's telegraphing, snows across Kansas, Missouri, into northern Arkansas with some ice as you go further south, and then a cold rain south of there, and then low pressure that moves across the Gulf states and actually brings some snow to the South Atlantic states, North Georgia and Alabama, and on up into the Carolinas and Southern Virginia. But it really doesn't make it much further north than that, as that low moves out to the east. Now, there's some question as to how real this is. That has been a real problem over the last few days with these models, with these systems. And remember, folks, again, I want to point back to the fact that this was where we were supposed to have that 2,500-mile warm front with snows basically from the central and southern Rockies all the way to the east coast. And you can see how wrong that was. The other thing as we go forward is that once we move through the middle part of next week, there's some question as to whether the pattern is going to continue or maybe take a break. The late afternoon run of the GFS wants to keep a colder look, and actually tries to make something for that first weekend in January 6th, 7th. I don't know how real this is. So, let me show you the forecast problems with the upper air. And first I'm going to go to the European model. And we're going to bring up the jet stream pattern here, and we will go back to the beginning, and you can see there's this large upper low. In fact, you know what, let's go to the North America view, because I think that's a better look. You've got this upper high up in the Arctic region, so you've got the flow that sets up from the Arctic regions down into Canada and across, swings west to east. There's a large upper air storm west of James Bay, and what happens is, if you watch over time, this is going through this week, you can see that the vortex kind of splits a little bit, and this is the opportunity that we would have to get something of consequence this weekend. You see how there's this sort of break in the middle. There's a little bit of a ridge that's trying to build there over the Great Lakes, in between the troughing that shifts to Newfoundland down to coastal New England, and then the next trough that's getting ready to swing around from Lake Winnipeg north and west. Well, the model just kind of gets rid of that. The new system just overwhelms everything on the European, but it does swing around a sharp trough here for Saturday. You can see this closed upper low near Lake Superior, and it swings this upper trough through the northeast on Saturday, and at least from the upper trough might produce some snow, and so could a bit of a coastal low that develops with it from this clipper that makes it a relatively near miss for something substantial, and then another shot of very cold air comes in behind it. The Canadian model, let me just back it up. I'll switch to the Canadian. Canadians actually have been doing half bad lately. Matches up with the European very well, and it has the same idea. You can see that upper low forms, and the trough sharpens up and moves on through here. And the Canadian has an even more aggressive look for snow for Saturday. But of course, we can never have uniformity with these things. It's got to always be a forecast problem, and the GFS illustrates that forecast problem. Even though they look fairly similar to about 60 hours or so, that's where the differences become apparent. The GFS does not build that ridge at all, and it just basically sort of has this broad bowl trough here. so that when the energy that swings around from the system in the Midwest, it really doesn't look anything like the Canadian model and the European. So this is for Sunday morning. You've got broad, in fact, what the GFS suggests is that another broad trough starts to develop from Lake Superior back southwest of the Colorado Rockies. This is what basically triggers that system in the southern branch of the jet for early next week. The European and the Canadian model are far less bullish with that idea. So here's your upper air with the GFS for Sunday morning, and here's your European. Look at the difference. Here's your Canadian. Canadian and European are very close, but the GFS wants nothing to do with any of this. It just does everything weaker and a lot faster. Push has an upper low up near Newfoundland. The next arm is getting ready to come around. Now, with respect to the long range, the late afternoon run of the GFS, unlike the midday run, does have a much colder look to it in the long term and keeps dropping troughs into the east right through the 10-day period. And it's only really toward the end that, you know, it modifies a little bit. But even here, you still have that setup from north central Canada down into the Great Lakes. There's some general troughing there. So this has a much colder look than what the prior run had of the model. And I'll show you what that was just a second if this thing would just let go. Hello? No response? It's not giving me any response here. Let me try this again. Interact. Nope, not working. All right, so here we go. So here's the previous run. There it is. So this was the previous run of the GFS, and we'll go backwards a little bit. And it kind of tries to make a ridge here in the east. Now this is the new one. Come on, this thing doesn't want to work for me today. There it is. Okay, so this was the prior run, and it brought back the ridge in the east, even though I think it's probably temporary, but it did bring back the ridge in the east for as you start to get maybe toward January 8th, 9th, and 10th. I mean, look, at some point, folks, there's going to have to be some moderation in the extreme cold, and that's definitely going to happen. But, you know, how that transpires remains to be seen. Why don't we take a look at the temperatures, because those are going to be such an issue here overall for the next 10 days or so, and we'll punch up the 2-meter temperatures here. You can see exactly how cold. Now, this is all out at 384 hours, and you can see the 50s here in response to that ridge in the east. So that's, again, off the old run. So why don't we go to the new run here so we have something a little more current. And okay, so we're all set. So this was our temperature profile today. Now we're into Wednesday morning. You can see the extent of the below zero temperatures in the white, and then you get into the purples across much of New York State and New England, and then extending back across the Great Lakes and on up into the northern plains where you got that -20. This is Thursday morning, a little bit lower, but certainly colder now in the northeast, where you've got temperatures below zero. And Friday morning, this is where we start to get the Clipper system beginning to arrive. Now, the GFS is actually not as cold as the European. I kind of skewed colder because even today, the models from yesterday and the day before were too warm. So I think it's really underplaying the extent of this cold air. Now, the second shot of cold air for later in the weekend and early next week, you start to see these -20s and -30s up through the northern plains. And now we're into Sunday morning, teens and single digits. Monday morning, look at that below zero that plunges down. But again, this is going to be determined by, you know, is the GFS right with this southern system that it shows. Either way, it's going to be very cold at the very least into the middle part of next week before you know, we get some moderation. You know, they only can have so much cold air that the models can produce and hang on to, and then after a while the air masses have to moderate to some degree, and the atmosphere has to be given some time to kind of reload the cold air. Now, as far as Europe is concerned, we will look at the weather over the next week or so. And it looks like we've got a little bit of snow here in the short term being indicated by the model in parts of southern England for overnight into Wednesday. And then as we go forward, the action shifts coming in from off the Atlantic, so that's a bit of a warmer flow. Looks like rain even into Germany and parts of Eastern Europe. So that warm air starts to take over into Europe for a little while through this next week to 10 days. The pattern doesn't look especially cold going into this first part of the new year. But as we start to get into day 7 and 8, it looks like it starts to turn a little colder, at least across England. And then you've got a rather significant storm being indicated around day 9 and 10 coming across southern England and into France. Now, over to southeastern Canada, because the Maritimes may do rather well with this. So let's bring up that map. And let's go back to the beginning. Go with that storm that's east of Labrador here. That's part of the reason why the cold air is hanging on. And you see how it just kind of rotated over the next 36 hours or so. It really didn't move very much, so that brings some waves of snow in from the northeast. And then going into the weekend with these potential coastal systems on the GFS, that one clips Newfoundland over the weekend. But the European would suggest a different outcome, and we'll bring the European up because the European, this is going to be a little problematic with the geography here. You know, the European does clip Nova Scotia with a pretty good storm on Sunday, just southeast of Nova Scotia there, a 970 low being indicated that intensifies even more, but that goes west of Newfoundland. So how this all this action plays out here over the in the East Coast over the next 4 or 5 days is going to be a determinant as to what kind of how much snow we're going to see up in parts of southeastern Canada, and whether we're going to be dealing with deep storms that get close to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland or stay further offshore. So I think that's going to be something we'll have to defer to later model runs, of course, as we start to get a bit more, get closer to these events and resolve this issue of whether the models are going to be right with the weather pattern across southern Canada affecting the northeast or not. Is the GFS, the colder and drier looking GFS, going to be correct going into New Year's, or are we going to have some snow to deal with for Saturday? And you know, I'm not sure yet, and I'm very honest about that. You know, I'm just not sure. I'm having a tough time trying to gauge which model has the better handle on all of this. It's very tough with these polar jets. Christopher Alley is here, and I hope your Christmas was a good one too. You're off all this week, so you're going to be here live every day this week. At 6 o'clock Eastern time is going to be my broadcast time pretty much this week, unless something throws me off, and if it does, I'll change it on the schedule here. Let's trying to see, you got the white, Delvin had that white Christmas that he was hoping for in Boston. I know you were asking for it for the last couple of weeks, and you did get it. Hadley, Mass, edited 7 to 9 inches there. Terrific. You had your white Christmas. The morning accumulation, Tom Adams, appreciably more than the 1 inch exceeded. You know, that definition, Tom, I know that you have to have it before 7 o'clock. I got to find out who actually came up with that. Why 7 o'clock? In my mind, and I said this yesterday, in my mind, if it snows any time during Christmas Day, it's a white Christmas. I mean, I guess they're technically because of Santa Claus and everybody wanting to wake up with snow on the ground. But you know what? I think we should kind of broaden that. Cynthia Guignadas, hope you had a great Christmas too. Merry Christmas, Anne-Marie Passeretti. Merry Christmas to you, always smiling. I hope you had a good Christmas as I did. North Belmore, James NASCAR fan. And only a half an inch for you, Cynthia, over in Central PA. It was a little variable there in some areas. Jason Schaefer, hi to you. Just trying to get a run. Can we get a blizzard, Michael Bologna wants, before the extreme cold air masses recede? You know, one of the conversations I was having on my Facebook page today was the fact that, you know, I think nothing is more depressing for snow lovers and cold weather lovers is to have it cold for weeks and not see a flake or an ice pellet during that time frame, and then only to warm up and rain. You know what? Stranger things have happened, and the fact that we have this overwhelming polar jet is not allowing a lot of room for things to happen, and that makes it that you know, it could be cold and dry through all of this. That's a distinct possibility with no major or relatively minor snow events over the next week or so. Don't rule that out. That is entirely possible. Let's see. Adam Fitz wants the first storm for mid-January. Okay, from storm, I'm thinking sizable is what you're referring to. 6 inches plus. You know, we got a long way to go, and in terms of the winter, obviously. And I'm thinking that, you know, we'll probably see the pattern adjust at some point to perhaps open spigots of moisture to start putting an end to this very dry, you know, scenario that we've had overall. And I was looking at the, you know, the overall weather map today with one big high sitting in eastern Montana and the western Dakotas, basically controlling the weather everywhere east of the Rockies, and there really isn't much else happening, even on the west coast, because they're in a ridge position. They are on the dry side. So anyhow, once again, folks, I really hope that you had a great Christmas, whether it was a snowy Christmas or not. I hope you really enjoyed your holiday. We are going to continue, of course, trying to get back to normal schedule here. So 6 o'clock Eastern time for the live streams for the rest of this work week anyway, and then over the weekend we'll maneuver depending on what kind of weather we're dealing with. And of course, you can check the latest website posts on meteorologistjoecioffi.com. And if you haven't checked out Angry Ben's page, you can do that on nycweathernow.com. Ryan Ford, is it possible for the storm system for Saturday to overcome the cold air mass and impact the East Coast regardless? Ryan, I think that the best you could hope for at this point is, you know, some kind of minor event. I will say this. Being that the air is very cold, if we wind up with something that even produces a quarter of an inch of liquid, that could be every bit of 4 or 5 inches, because I'm thinking that we could see snow with temperatures in the upper teens and low 20s. So we're going to be dealing with snowfall ratios on the order of at least 15 to 1, maybe even 18 or 20 to 1, depending on where you are and how low the temperatures are. So it won't take a lot to put down some snow accumulation, but you got to have something there, and that is, I think, the big question. Is the GFS correct in overwhelming the cold air and keeping things dry? Stephen Franco, I hope you had a great Christmas, and congrats to you, by the way. I thought I saw you got engaged this weekend, so congratulations to Stephen Franco. And the GFS not totally right. Redskins fans forever says the GFS not totally right with saying Pennsylvania gets like 11 inches. Yeah, right now I would bet against it. If it overwhelms cold air, you're not going to see very much at all. Okay, so let's leave it at that, folks. Just trying to get back into the swing of things here, so it's just taking me a little bit longer to get my head in gear. Once again, I hope you're enjoying your Christmas holiday. Merry Christmas to you and to your families. Stay safe through the rest of this holiday season, and we will see you tomorrow. By the way, the Joe and Joe Show will be on tonight at 9:15 Eastern Time on Facebook. So jump onto my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Sometime about 9:15 tonight, Joe and I will do our 30 minutes, and we'll have maybe some new weather models to look at, and we'll go through this all over again. And Joe has his opinions of what we can expect going forward, and he'll be with us again 9:15 on Eastern Time on Facebook. All right, folks. Good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow, or hopefully at 9:15.